Okay, now for the third case, it's not very difficult, but we're going to go ahead and make a lot of examples out of it so that you understand. If you're adding either a positive to a negative, which you could kind of write it as plus to negative, positive to negative, or negative to positive. The good news is you're going to do exactly the same thing in both cases. So positive to negative or negative plus positive. You're going to do exactly the same thing in both of those cases, but it's something, again, you haven't learned before because you're just learning about these negative numbers. So what you're going to do in this case, the result can be positive or negative. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky to people. So it could be a positive number or it could be a negative number in the answer. And the trick is, how do you figure out if it's positive or negative? The sign, let me put it a different way. The answer that you get will be the same sign as the larger absolute value in your problem. Okay, now I know you're reading this and you're like, oh my goodness, I definitely don't get this. But you know what? It's just like anything else in math. You crack open a book, you read a definition, and your brain shuts down because maybe you don't understand what they're saying. Let's read it together one more time. When you're adding a positive to a negative or a negative to a positive, all I'm telling you is that the answer can be either positive or negative, right? Either one. And the way you find out if it's going to be positive or negative is that the answer is going to have the same exact sign as whichever number has the larger absolute value in the original problem, right? So it's a lot of words, but I think you'll get it really quickly if we just go ahead and draw some pictures and do some problems. So let's say we had 5, positive 5, plus negative 2. So see, we have a positive plus a negative right there. Now the answer is going to be 3, positive 3. So let me go ahead and explain first of all that the answer in the sign of the answer, right here, has exactly the same sign as the number with the larger absolute value. See, this is positive 5 and this is negative 2. Remember, absolute value, it just gets rid of the sign. So this number is actually bigger from an absolute value point of view than the negative number. So the answer is going to be positive just because this number is positive. And of course, this is negative here. Now, what do you do to get the actual number? You just simply subtract the absolute values here. So 5 minus 2 is 3, so that's why we get a 3 there. Let's do another one, and I think you'll see it by repetition. What if you had 4 plus negative 3? 4 plus negative 3. Well, what you're going to do here, because they're different signs like this, you're going to basically take and subtract the numbers from one another, just a simple absolute value. So 4 minus 3 is going to give you 1. And the larger of these two numbers, absolute value-wise, is positive. So this is going to be positive 1. Now, we know that, I'm drawing this little arrow to show you that it comes from there. We know that when you write positive numbers down, you don't need to carry this plus sign all over the place. I'm just doing it on the board to show you explicitly what's going on. Do a couple of additional. 6 plus negative 4. All right? So what you do when you have it with different signs, no matter if it's negative plus positive or positive plus negative, is you just simply subtract the number. 6 minus 4 gives me 2. And the bigger number is positive, so there's a positive sign there. When I say the bigger number, it's the absolute value, right? Now let's flip it around a little bit. And let's say I had negative 2, so a negative number first, plus positive 3. But it's exactly the same thing. You just take the numbers that you have a 2 here and you have a 3 here, and you subtract them. 3 minus 2 gives you 1. And the bigger number is this one on the absolute value side of things, so it's positive. So the sign kind of came from the fact that that one was bigger. Now if you had something like this, negative 9 plus positive 5, you're going to do the same thing. It's negative plus positive, so you have different signs, so you subtract. So you subtract 9 minus 5 is going to give you 4. But see, the bigger number here, absolute value-wise, is actually negative because the absolute value of negative 9 is 9, and the absolute value of that is just 5. So what you're going to have here is negative 4. That's going to be the answer here. And of course, if the answer is negative, you have to keep the negative sign around. Let's do one more, and then we'll draw a couple of pictures. Let's say we had negative 10 plus 2. So we have negative plus positive, so we subtract the numbers. 10 minus 2 is 8. And the larger of these two numbers is the 10 absolute value-wise, so the answer is going to be negative. So you see, it's consistent. It's the same thing. When you have positive plus negative, or negative plus positive, in every case, all you do is subtract the numbers from one another. It doesn't matter which one's first or which one's second. You just take the bigger number and subtract the other one. That's going to be your answer. And then, in fact, if it's positive or negative, it just comes from whichever one is larger. Now, let me clue you in on a little bit of something here and tell you that I didn't explicitly tell you this, but when you have a positive plus a negative or a negative plus a positive, it's basically the same thing as subtracting the numbers. So what we're writing here is a plus negative 2 is really the same thing as subtracting 2, because you already know that 5 minus 2 gives you 3. So it just gets a little bit confusing when you have the negative in the front. You may not know how to read it, but I'm trying to give you this bulletproof way to do it. You subtract the numbers and stick the positive or negative on accordingly. Now, if you had represented this like in a number line, just to kind of do a couple of quick ones here, okay, then you would have a number line here, like let's say for this one, and this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. So negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you always start, just to make it easy and consistent, go ahead and start with the first number. You start over here, so I'm going to put here a little arrow, start. That's where I'm starting. And I'm adding to it a negative number, which means I'm not going to go to the right because I'm not adding a positive number. I'm adding a negative number, so I'm going to go to the left. And I'm going to do that 3 units. 1, 2, 3. So I landed here. The answer is positive 1. Just exactly what we got. If we had something like this, 0, negative 1, negative 2, 1, 2, 3. And if we're doing this problem, we start at negative 2. We're going to start right here, right? And in this case, we are adding a positive number, so we are going to move on the right, and we're going to go 3 times, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to land at positive 1, so that's right here. So you see the number line does give us the right answer just like it did the last time. You can always start with that first number, and you can always move left or move right, depending on if you're adding or subtracting your number. But again, you can't draw a number line every time you have to do this. You need to get comfortable with doing it. The bulletproof way of doing it is basically just to memorize that whenever you have a positive plus a negative, or a negative plus a positive, either way, all you do is subtract the numbers, the absolute values, to get the number, and then the sign comes from the bigger absolute value. Now let me show you one more thing, and then we're gonna work several problems. I told you that, basically I told you that adding, I'm just gonna write it down, adding a negative number, and this is the number sign, negative number, is the same thing exact thing as subtraction. So when you were in first grade, they didn't really tell you about negative numbers because it would confuse you. But it's easy to understand the concept of subtraction. All I'm trying to say is that when you write these things like this, it ends up doing the same thing as subtraction. So for instance, let's say you had 5 plus negative 1. This is exactly the same thing as 5 minus 1, which is 4. And you would get the same answer the way I told you. I said subtract the numbers, that would give you a 4, and the sign comes from the bigger absolute value, positive, right? What if you had 8 plus negative 6? This is exactly the same thing as when you have a plus minus there, it's 8 minus 6, and that's going to give you a 2. So anytime you have a plus minus in there, I guess is really what I'm trying to teach you, it's exactly the same thing as subtraction. Now, if you want to leave it written like this, or if you want to convert it over to a looking like subtraction, you can do that. That's either way you want. If you had negative 3 plus negative 4, that's exactly the same thing as negative 3 minus 4. And remember, we learned how to do that in just a second ago. Negative plus negative always gave us a negative answer, and we just added the absolute value. So we had negative 7. 3 plus 4 is 7. Negative comes because it's negative plus negative. I already had owed somebody something. I borrowed 4 more things, so of course I'm going to have it like that. So when you're working your problems, and in fact in the next section we're going to actually subtract integers. I guess what I'm really trying to tell you is you're already really subtracting integers. We're just going to formulate it a little bit more like you'll see it in the textbook here in the next section to kind of give you more practice. But this is basically the same thing as subtraction. And I do remember back when they told me that when I first learned algebra, and I just didn't get it. But you have to realize is a negative number is when you owe somebody something. Subtraction is when you owe somebody something. You take it away, right? So those two things are really the same thing. When you have plus negative, it's the same thing as basically subtracting that away. So however is better for you to think about it. If it's easier for you to convert this like this, that's fine. If it's easier for you to leave it like this and use the rules I've given you, that's fine.